Models of Battletech history! Aidan Pryde! Versus Aidan Pryde! Begin!
Welcome, Battletech fans. I hope you liked my little homage to epic rap battles of history, but unfortunately there will be no rapping in this video. Today we're going to be painting Aidan Pryde's Timberwolf from the Robert Thurston novel Falcon Guard, so thank you for joining me. Falcon Guard was one of the first Battletech novels I ever read as a teenager, and I liked it so much that I went back and read the other two. Then I reread Falcon Guard with a new sense of the characters, and it always stuck with me. I'm painting an Ironwind Metals version of the miniature alongside the Catalyst version because, well, I figured if I painted one, someone would inevitably ask if I would paint the other, so hey, why not both? All the paints that you'll need for this are in the video description, so feel free to follow along and check out that list later. For now, let's get started. So the first thing you'll notice is this miniature was already primed before I started filming. I like to use an inexpensive brand of primer available at any O'Reilly Auto Parts called Duplicolor Sandable White. Now normally this is where I would start working on whatever my main colors are, but today we're going to do something a little bit different. Let's talk about layering. You'll notice I'm going to start with 2 thin coats of Abaddon black on each miniature. I used to say back in the day that I could never understand why anybody would ever prime in black, but experience has taught me otherwise, so let's talk about it. I'm doing this because I want the green I'm going to paint over it later to appear as dark and as drab as possible without altering the color itself too much. I want that color, just a slightly darker version of it. So think of painting a black undercoat as a way to lower the hue of whatever color you're about to paint on top of it. Here I am trying a Zenithal highlight. I always hear people talk about how great this is, but I can never see the difference. Oh well, let's see how this turns out. I sprayed this at an angle and gave each miniature a light dusting of Wraithbone. Even if it's a little speckled, it's okay. Don't cover the whole miniature, just give the areas where you want to simulate light hitting the miniature a quick dusting before moving on. If you think of a black undercoat as lowering the hue of the color you're about to apply, think of this step as helping bring that color back to its original brightness for just those areas. Loren Forest is the perfect color in my mind for this. The black undercoat is going to lower the hue slightly, and after the next step, this will be the right shade of green for my taste. I've noticed paint jobs of Aidan's Timberwolf tend to vary, but the version I've always held in my head was the classic OD green, almost Star League drab military style green. So make sure you thin your paints for these steps, and don't worry if the paint isn't opaque on the first coat. That's why we do a second one. George Carlin used to say dumber than a second coat of paint, but I don't think he ever painted miniatures, so we're going to ignore that advice for the time being. Now if it were Peter Cushing, but seriously, use 2 thin coats. It really does work.
1 finger will mean the high straight ball. 2 fingers will mean the low straight ball.
What about my curveball? And my slider? And my knuckleball? And my sidearm? And my submarine pitch?
1 finger will mean the high straight ball. And 2 fingers will mean the low straight ball.
The next step for the tone of green I'm looking for is to apply a good coat of Athonian Camoshade. All you're looking for here is coverage. You don't want to apply too much and have it pooling in places you'd rather not have it. So every time you go back for more, try to spread out what you have before you add more to it. It's always possible to add more, but taking away is much harder, so don't rush yourself here. Just apply as close to an even coat as you can over the entire surface and let it collect in the deep recesses of the miniature. Let it dry for about an hour or so, and allow gravity to work on the wash and pull it in the directions where shadows would naturally fall. In the next step, we'll capitalize on the effect of the wash with a light dry brushing to give the miniature the illusion of depth. So here I am doing the dry brushing in Straken green. Is it Straken green? Straken green? I'm not sure, but I'm doing the dry brushing and that's what's important. So I'm going to apply just a little bit of paint to the tip of my brush, and I'm going to dust most of that paint off on this napkin here. I don't want too much paint left in the bristles. I'm probably going to use my fingernail to test it to make sure there's not too much paint coming off. I used a Zenithal highlight earlier, so what I'm going to do is pay just a little extra attention to the dry brushing from that angle, as that's where I wanted my light source to be. So I'll do less on those areas I feel are more likely to be in shadow considering my light source, but I don't want to ignore them completely. I really like how these turned out. I can definitely see how the Zenithal highlight really helped to add a layer of extra brightness to the spots where I wanted to simulate incoming light. I'm pretty happy with it, all things said, and I don't really say that too often. So I encourage you to try it, and if you do, come back and tell me in the comments what you thought. Now the final step before we really get to play around with the flavor of this miniature is going to be the metallics. I try to tell people to sit down for a few minutes with the miniature and pick out the parts that you want to be metallic looking before you start. That way you have a plan and you can get started easier. I tend not to go overboard on metallics. I'll usually pick out vents, heat sinks, gun barrels, or plates and screws, but once you've seasoned this to your personal taste, it's time to move on to one of my favorite parts, the blast damage. Making this miniature look like it's seen a fight recently is as easy as using your stippling brush with some Abaddon black. Stippling is much like dry brushing. Brush off most of the paint and test it before applying, but instead of a back and forth motion, the motion you're looking for here is if you were trying to poke holes in it. This is my favorite part because it allows you to, in a way, fix the mistakes that you may have made or cover up areas you're not necessarily happy with by making it look like it was part of a firefight. This is one of the reasons I try to encourage folks to finish a miniature before they decide that it looks bad, because you never know what might develop because you made a mistake. Bob Ross was right, you know. Once I get all the blackened areas squared away, I'll repeat this process with just a bit of Leadbelcher to simulate showing the exposed metal underneath the paint. What I'm not going to do, however, is scuff up too much of the spots where my Zenithal highlights were, so as not to remove that effect altogether. I'll get a few spots on that side of the miniature, but I'm going to try to avoid those highlighted areas for the most part. And here I am working on the cockpit. This is just one of those magical things that contrast paint can do for you that is super intuitive, super easy, and just off the beaten path, and you wouldn't normally think of it. So that's why I'm about to tell you about it. All I do is I take a flash Gitz yellow, canary yellow, just something super bright yellow, whatever you like. And then I paint it inside the cockpit as best as I can. Am I precision with this? No. Does working with yellow ever work out for me? Hardly ever. In this case, it was the same thing. The yellow looks chunky no matter what I do with it. I thin it out, it doesn't matter. But here's the fun part. That doesn't matter. Because once I'm done with all of this, what I'm going to do is whip out my Iyanden yellow contrast paint, and I'm going to put just a dab in each of these spots. And because that paint is chunky looking and it looks terrible, whatever you want to say, when that contrast paint fills in on all those little holes and nooks and crannies that paint made, it's going to make this cockpit look like it's on fire. And that's exactly what I want. So hey, Bob Rossed that shit. What do you say? The final details for this miniature can really be anything you want or none of the above. If you don't like doing decals, don't do decals. If you don't like painting the missile tips, don't paint the missile tips. This is just doing whatever you want to do, following the old 80s rule of cool. For me, it was putting some decals on, painting those missile tips. I put a number 1 on the plastic one here, seeing as how Falcon Guard was the very first Battletech novel I ever read, so hey, it's number 1 today. As far as the decals go, I'm 100% convinced that I'm applying them incorrectly but somehow making it look good in the final product. So when I'm convinced that I know what I'm doing and I'm doing it properly, I'll make a video about doing decals. So look for that sometime in the near future. Alright, Battletech fans, thank you so much for joining us on this little painting session. I sure hope you've enjoyed it, and as always, feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments below. Want to give a quick shout out to Cole Walker of Rocket Custom Painting and Miniatures for teaching me this technique. The only real difference between what I do and what he does was the Athonian Camoshade wash and the Zenithal highlight. If you haven't checked out Rocket Custom Painting and Miniatures on Facebook, please do so and let them know you heard their name right here on Battlebound. Folks, thank you once again so much for watching. I'm Tuckdavian, and we'll see you next time right here on the Space Lanes.
Who won? Who's next? You decide!
Be sure to smash our like button and subscribe to our channel.
Crowdfunding is when lots of people give you small amounts of money to help your passion project come to life.